suggesting that they have not yet integrated, there is an assimilationist undertone in the interpretation of the law, which becomes problematic. 169 attempts to rectify that by recognizing the indigenous population as, quote, cooperating with the people concerned, right? This idea of a cooperative outcome will require that those within global capital recognize the plight of indigenous populations, even if it means, albeit, and it usually is only because of sort of the codification of law. For whatever reasons, these individuals are unwilling to, let's say, for example, leave their ancestral lands because there's some resource that you want. If you can cooperate with them and tell them that you'll build them housing and you'll provide for their kids and you can make some type of arrangements, that's between you and them, right? Facilitated by some external party, typically governmental or international representation, as a form of negotiation, right? This would be a great point of international negotiation between, and this happens all the time in NGOs. I mean, this is like an everyday occurrence. Negotiators from NGOs representing, in a sense, right, representing the indigenous population and attempting to find some middle ground between the needs of the indigenous population and the representative, whoever he or she might be, from global capital, right? So they don't want you to have access to their lands. We need access to their lands. What are you willing to do? Here's what we'll do. Let me talk to the leaders of the community, see what they say. Here's what they want. Here's how we meet. You find a middle ground. It's more cooperative, right? It's not this idea that they haven't yet assimilated. So in fairness to the revisions in the ILO, there is an attempt to at least acknowledge the role of indigenous populations and cooperate and work with. Now, shifting gears a bit, then to look more at the holistic historical concept, only so far as we recognize that the historical concept fuels our intellectual development of the concept indigenous, and then specifically indigenous population, we need to look at the end of the Bretton Woods system, right? So this is the system in place, and I don't want to get too technical, but I'm going to skip ahead. I'll talk about this in a second, right? So the end, sort of, it seems like we're shifting gears, but it actually pertains, right? The end of the Bretton Woods, W-O-O-D-S, Alright, so the end of the Bretton Woods system, right? And sort of a remedy, right, for overvaluation. I'm not going to go into a whole economic discourse. Pretty interesting stuff, though, that I found in preparing the notes for this speech, this lecture, rather. In 1971, the then U.S. President Richard Nixon announced the quote-unquote temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility to gold, right? So there was a temporary suspension on the dollar's convertibility to gold, right? PEN of the dollar's sorry, such a bad speller. I-B-I-L-I-T-Y. Is there that many I's? Yeah, convertibility to gold. Alright, so the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility to gold. This is August 1971. Alright, remember what we said. 57. Now, 71. Then, 89. Right? Alright, 57, C107, 89, C169, and now we're talking about the end of the Bretton Woods system. Okay, so just sort of historically situate this. Alright, just to give you an idea, and I'm not going to get into this because I'm not an economist, but the par value, I'm not even going to write this down, the par value, the dollar amount that is assigned to the security when representing, and this is almost a direct quote, right? The dollar amount that is assigned to a security when representing the value contribution of each share in cash or gold, right? The connection to cash or gold. What ends up happening, however, and I discussed this, I think, in the second half of my discussion on global capitalism and human rights with respect to the pessimistic interpretations of what might happen in the 21st century and on in relationship to global capitalism. And the idea was hot money, which is a technical term, hot money investment. I talked about what that was. So hot money investment can cripple and destabilize sort of the internal economic flow of capital within the state. The argument, albeit a very, very sort of technical and extremely complicated argument, the ghetto version is that there was a similar threat, right? Allegedly, there was a similar. I'm just trying to give credit to sort of the historical narrative. There was a similar threat, and Nixon said it himself, right? There was a similar threat to the dollar, the American dollar at the time, from potential outside external foreign investors, right? So that we don't want to undermine the value of capital, American currency, by allowing the dollar to be threatened by outside foreign investors. Therefore, what we did, arguably, Nixon says, is that we are going to temporarily suspend the convertibility of gold, the dollar to gold, to protect, if you will, the flow of capital. Now, this is the stock sort of response. Everybody knows what happens as a consequence of this. There's no need to rehash that. It's sort of a common historical narrative of what happened in Nixon's administration, for better or for worse. But the idea in itself, to do credit, is that at least at its face value, there was an attempt to protect the dollar from what was perceived as a grievous threat. Now, granted, we have, and do I talk about this? Yeah, I do talk about it. So, as a matter of fact, I'll talk about it in a second, about the Great Societies program, what happened there, our commitment, engagements into the war, and sort of, regular consequences of, I wouldn't go so far as saying hyperinflation, but overvaluation. So, two American ideals. This is Nixon, he says it himself, right? Two American ideals. Two American ideals, based on the opportunities presented after the Vietnam War and Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Societies program, right? So the combination of, think about the what's the word I'm looking for? Strain. Think about the strain on capital in committing to a war on the scale of the Vietnam War, coupled with the strain on capital by Lyndon Johnson's Great Societies program. So, Great Societies program, strain on capital, coupled with the strain on capital by the Vietnam War, and you can see how there is, quote unquote, a threat to capital, and this threat is realized in the 21st century today, right? We've sort of substituted the wars, right? We've substituted the conflicts, but the sort of governing theoretical conceptual, and this is why I do theories, because you can sort of see pattern reproducibility, recognition that situation changes, but the overarching pattern is the same. Engagement in First Iraq War, engagement in Second Iraq War, the attack on the World Trade Center, the subsequent collapse of the global economy in 2008, the threat of hyperinflation and hot money investment. All of that does present a very unique and specific challenge, both then and now, to the flow of capital. Now, the two ideals were, one, a full generation of peace, which I will tie into sort of the indigenous population in a second, but I wanted to get this sort of conceptual luggage out there. And then two, create a new prosperity without war, right? Basically that means increase the flow of capital without having to go to war. great. I mean, this is, you know, if you could do that, that's awesome. That's awesome. Right? So creating